Okay, we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Today is February 4th, 2012. Okay, good morning everybody. And again I have to repeat my message to the people who are listening in on the internet. Maybe I have to say, welcome to all of our listeners around the country and around the world. And my message for those who are listening in on the internet, watching on the internet, is if you have questions, please keep them concise and to the point, because there are people who have to copy the questions, and if the question turns into a long comment, then it becomes a hardship for them. Okay, so today we will be taking the Sutta number 67 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called the Catuma Sutta. Okay, the sutta is called Catuma Sutta because it takes place when the Buddha was living in a place called Catuma. Exactly where Catuma is, we don't know, but the fact that the Sakyans are mentioned in this sutta indicates that it's probably someplace within the state of the Sakyans. That would be in the northeast, maybe where lower Nepal is now located. Okay, so when the sutta begins, 500 monks headed by the Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana had come to Catuma to see the Blessed One, the Buddha. And now when we say in the suttas the number 500, generally we shouldn't take it too literally. It seems to be a kind of standard figure that the suttas use to indicate a very large number. And since these monks are headed by the Venerable Sariputta and Moggallana, this would suggest that they were ordained under Sariputta and Moggallana. And this, somehow, according to the commentary, this seems a little hard to understand. These monks had never seen the Buddha before. You know, they had maybe learned the Dhamma from Sariputta and Moggallana, and they had, of course, Sutta or faith in the Buddha, but they had never seen him in person. And so Sariputta and Moggallana decided to bring these monks, their disciples, to see the Buddha in the expectation that this would strengthen their confidence and trust in the Dhamma, and that they would get to hear a discourse from the Buddha's own mouth. Okay, so what happens, and this is going to be a very unusual sutta in certain respects. Okay, the new bhikkhus, the visiting bhikkhus arrive at this Catuma. There must have been kind of just temporary quarters put up. It doesn't seem that there's no monastery here, but maybe the people of the town had made just provisional straw huts, grass huts for the monks to stay in. And so the new monks arrive, then they're exchanging greetings with the monks who've been living there for some time, and they're preparing their dwelling places, putting away their bowls and robes. And as they're doing so, they become Pali uses the word expression, Ucca Saddha, Mahasaddha, which is translated loud and noisy. They're making a great noise. And generally when monks come to a new place, they're expected to be fairly quiet and restrained. I don't see that there should be there's certainly no prohibition against exchanging greetings with other monks, but probably they were talking rather loudly, maybe cracking jokes, and in a way that was considered unfitting, improper for a monastic person. Okay, so the Buddha is overhearing this racket that's taking place. And so he speaks to Venerable Ananda. And this is really a pretty sharp statement that the Buddha makes. And one would expect the Buddha will know what's happening, but it seems he wants to sort of lay the ground for a criticism. So he says, Ananda, who are these loud and noisy people? One would think they were fishermen hawking fish, selling fish. That's one way to explain that expression, but the commentary gives two explanations because the exact meaning of the Pali is a little unclear. So it could be either that they're fishermen at the marketplace after they've made their catch and now they're selling the fish, dealing with bargaining with the customer. The customer wants to get 2 fish for the merchant is selling the fish for $2.75. The buyer says, "Give me 2 for $65." The seller says, "No, 2 for $70." The buyer says, "No, 2 for $60." Bargaining in that way. The other explanation is that it's like fishermen who have caught a bunch of fish, throwing out a net, and they're dragging in the net, and they're making a lot of noise as they're doing so. I don't know if any of you have ever seen fishermen on the coast pulling in fish with the net. When they catch the fish, they're shouting, "Pull harder! Drag it in! Drag it to the left! Pull it to the right!" So anyway, so the Buddha is obviously criticizing the way these monks are behaving. Okay, so Ananda replies that he just explains to the Buddha what is happening. Okay, so then the Buddha addresses Ananda and he says, "Call those monks and tell them to come to me." Okay, so Ananda does so, and then when the monks come, they pay respects to the Buddha, they sit down, and then the Buddha asks them, it really seems like a bit cutting, he says, "Monks, why are you so loud and noisy? One would think you were fishermen hawking fish." And the monks explain that we're 500 monks, we're the disciples of Sariputta and Moggallana, and we've come to see you, and as we was exchanging greetings with the other monks, we started to speak a little loudly, and that accounts for the noise. And now the Buddha speaks really very sternly to them. He says, "Go, leave, get out of here, monks. I dismiss you. You shouldn't stay near me." How do we understand this? Isn't the Buddha supposed to be very patient, very tolerant? And shouldn't he want to encourage these monks? How do we understand this? Anybody have any ideas? Excuse me?
They gave the wrong answer.
No, they explained exactly what went on. You look like you have the answer.
I had this sutra with you before, so
Say it.
It's supposed to be mindful.
Yeah, they're supposed to be mindful. But why can't the Buddha just say you should be more mindful? Why does he send them away?
Just wondering whether it's symbolic that if you have all this chatter within your head, you have to send it away and not get involved in it?
No, it's not really intended symbolically.
Okay.
Oh, why are you smiling?
But I have a very real idea. I think because the Buddha was getting old, he couldn't put up with the noise. because it's at the time when Ananda was the personal attendant, so the Buddha must be pretty old.
Maybe, but still it doesn't explain why the Buddha should speak, so...
It's Oriental culture.
And that's a good idea, Oriental culture.
Right.
But anything more specific? You want to try again?
No, it's please, one day explain it so that we can remember and practice.
What I meant by wrong answer was he's asking why you're being so noisy.
Yeah.
And when they said, well, we're 500 monks and everything else, I think that they were missing the point of his question.
Oh, that's a good idea. I don't think
And
of it.
so when they said,
Oh.
we're 500 monks, he didn't ask them that. He said, why are you being so noisy?
Oh, that's a good point. I wasn't thinking of that.
Yeah, and referring not only to their outer speech, but to their minds. If their minds are quiet, then they'd be quiet.
Mm.
If their minds are noisy, then they're going to be noisy.
Mm.
So they, in a sense, were completely missing his point, but also being disrespectful.
I actually don't think that they're being disrespectful. It's a good point that you bring up, though it wasn't exactly what I had in mind.
Mine has something to do with attachment and being excited at being in a particular place, because a lot of the rest of it, the Sutta deals with, more detachment and not being so involved in things.
Yeah, but it seems that even though your idea is that the monks might have had some attachment to seeing the Buddha,
Yes.
but certainly, if we accept what the commentary says, this will be like the first time they're getting to see the Buddha, and as soon as they come into his presence, get out. Somebody comes to visit me at Taishu Hall. As soon as they walk in, I say, get out. It's not going to make a good impression. Take the microphone.
I think Buddha is very smart. He knows when the right timing, who the right person to preach. So they just turn it down a little bit.
They just what?
Buddha to turn these people down a little bit.
Yeah.
When they change their attitude, ready for the learning, so Buddha will teach them again.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much exactly what I was thinking. Very good. Yeah, the Buddha really wants to teach them, to help them, to encourage them, because apparently they're new monks, so he wants to, to uplift them and inspire them and to encourage them. But he has to establish the right frame of mind, establishing them the right frame of mind. So when he sends them away, his real intention is not to get rid of them. He knows that, that circumstances are going to work in such a way that they will come back. And when they come back, then their minds will be more settled. They'll know that they have to conduct themselves, deport themselves properly in the presence of the Buddha, and then they'll be more open to his teaching. If he doesn't discipline them in this way and starts to teach them, their minds will still be thinking about, what Johnny said here, what Dickie said here, what Marys, although no Marys, just other monks. What Venerable Kemaratana said here, what Venerable Dhammaratana said there, what Venerable Piyananda said there. So now when he sends them away, then they'll learn their lesson, and then when they come back, they will be quiet, subdued, and restrained. And this reminds me, there's a sutta that comes in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Fours. The Buddha is speaking to a horse trainer, a man who trains horses. And he asks the horse trainer, how do you train a horse? Then the horse trainer says, there are different ways that I train a horse. There is a gentle way. There is a stern or harsh way to train the horse. There's a way which combines the stern and the harsh. The gentle and the stern. Sometimes one, sometimes the other. And then the Buddha says, what happens if you try to train a horse and he doesn't submit to any of these types of training? Then the horse trainer says, in that case, I kill him. Then the horse trainer asks the Buddha, and how do you train when the disciple comes to you for training? How do you train the disciple? The Buddha says, just like you, I have the gentle way to train him, I have the harsh or stern way to train him, and I have the way that combines the gentle and the harsh. Then the horse trainer says to the Buddha, if the horse doesn't submit to if the man doesn't submit to any of these types of trainings, then what do you do with him? Then the Buddha says, if he doesn't submit to any of them, then I kill him. So then the horse trainer is shocked and he says, certainly you can't say that. You are the Buddha. You are the great, wise and compassionate one. You're known for being so loving and so compassionate. How can you say that you kill the disciple? And the Buddha says that if there's a disciple who won't submit to any type of training, then I don't speak to him. I don't give him any more teachings. And the other wise monks don't give him any more teachings. And that is what we call death in the discipline of the Noble One. Okay, so in this case, the Buddha hasn't reached the point of applying capital punishment to these monks. He's not absolutely refusing to speak to them. But this is what you might call the kind of stern or harsh way of training them, to getting them to recognize their fault and to learn how to conduct themselves properly when they come to the Buddha. Okay, so the Buddha tells these monks to depart, and then they go, they get their things, prepare their things, they take their bowl and their extra robe, and then they start to leave. Okay, and then as they're departing, the Sakyans of living in the town had met in their assembly hall, and they saw this large group of monks walking away. And so they come up to them and they ask them, where are you going, Venerables? And then the monks say, quite openly and honestly, they don't try to fudge over why they're leaving. They don't say that, oh, we're going just on a pilgrimage or we're going to visit another place. But they quite openly and honestly, they say that we've been dismissed by the Buddha. But these Sakyans apparently are very devoted to the Sangha, and so they want to try to persuade. Perhaps it's probably the case, I would assume it's the case, that the monks explained in more detail what had happened. So the Sakyans knew that the monks hadn't really done anything dreadfully wrong. And so the monks, the Sakyans, wanted to help the monks to come back to the Buddha's presence. And so the Sakyans went to the Buddha, then they try to appeal to the Buddha to accept the monks to come back. They say, Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One delight in the Sangha of bhikkhus. Let the Blessed One welcome the Sangha of bhikkhus. Let the Blessed One help the Sangha of bhikkhus. Now, just as he used to help them in the past. Then he said, the Sakyans are now going to use a more emotional appeal. So he says, there are, in this group of monks, there are new monks who have just gone forth. They've recently come to this Dharma and discipline. If they don't get the opportunity to see the Buddha, then there might take place some change or alteration in them. That means they might lose their faith, their trust, their commitment, leave the homeless life and then return to the worldly life. Okay, now the Sakyans use some similes to try to make the case more strongly, to strengthen their case. They say that it's just like when we plant young seedlings, because they earn their living by cultivation, so this is something that's quite obvious to them. Okay, so when we plant the seedlings, then if they don't get any water, then what happens to the seeds? They just shrivel up, dry, and die. And so it is with these young monks. If they don't get to see the Blessed One, then, in a sense, their faith might dry up, shrivel, and die. And again, they use another simile. It's just as when a young calf, very maternal simile, does not see its mother, there may take place some change or alteration. The calf gets young calf. Anybody have experience with calves? Anybody from the farm background? All city slickers, huh? Yeah, I don't know from personal experience myself either. I was a city slicker. But I would think if the calf doesn't see its mother, it gets very upset, very sad, dejected. And also it depends on the mother for the milk, so it doesn't get the milk that it needs. And so no food, no emotional comfort. Okay, so these young monks are just like the young calf. They depend on seeing the Buddha, getting the milk of his teaching in order to grow and thrive in their spiritual life. And so again, the Sakyans appeal to the Buddha to help the monks, just as he always used to do in the past. Okay, then maybe this is a little embellishment to show that these young monks have the support not only of the Buddha's own relatives. Don't forget the Sakyans are the Buddha's relatives. So these are the Buddha's cousins and uncles and second cousins and so forth coming and appealing to him to accept the monks back. But now it's not only human beings, but even the deities are concerned, because now Brahma Sahampati knows what is, apparently Brahma knows what has been happening, and so he vanishes from his celestial abode and he comes down in front of the Buddha, arranges his upper robe just like a human being on one shoulder, salutes the Buddha, and then he appeals to the Buddha in exactly the same way. Who is Brahma Sahampati? Does anybody know? Our expert.
He's the one who said, "Oh, please, Blessed One, teach."
Right. Yeah, he was the one when the Buddha, after the Buddha achieved enlightenment, when the Buddha's mind was inclining just to remain silent and to live at ease. It was Brahma Sahampati who comes down in front of the Buddha and says, "Please, the world is enveloped in darkness. There are some with little dust in their eyes who can understand. Please go out and teach the Dhamma." So it seems Brahma-sahampati often appears at certain critical events in the life of the Buddha in order to encourage the Buddha to change his mind. Okay, so through the appeals of the Shakyans of Catuma and the appeal of Brahma-sahampati, the Buddha changed his mind, and his mind settled. Well, actually the text uses the word prasanna. The Buddha's mind became, trusting or confident in those monks. Now this is a little peculiar, what happens next. You see, the Buddha doesn't send a messenger to the monks saying, go call those monks and get them to come back. But rather, Venerable Moggallana addresses the monks and says, get up, friends, take your bowls and robes and come back to the Blessed One, because now he's been convinced by these similes. So if Mahamoggallana is with the monks, how can he know this without a messenger coming?
Because he's foremost in spiritual power. And he's well known for being able to communicate psychically and a lot of
Good.
He knows what one of the deities are thinking. He's good at that.
Good answer. Yeah, so Moggallana, as you said, he has the divine eye and the psychic powers, so he can know what's happening in the Buddha's mind. And so he was able to tell the monks, get your bowls and robes, and let's go back to the Buddha. Okay, now comes a very important incident. Okay, they all come back to the Buddha, and then the Buddha asks Venerable Sariputta, he says, what did you think, Sariputta, when I dismissed the Sangha of monks? Okay, then Sariputta says, what I thought was that you've dismissed this group of monks. Now you want to abide inactive. This is actually the same word that the Buddha used when he was describing his experience after his enlightenment. He said, my mind inclined to inactivity. That is, not to teaching, not to promoting the Dhamma, but just to live quietly and peacefully, devoted to pleasant abiding here and now, just entering into the states of deep meditation, coming out for the meals, and then just going back into meditation, not taking any active role in teaching. And so then Sariputta says, you, the Buddha, you want to live quiet, devoted to a pleasant abiding, and we too should now abide inactive, devoted to a pleasant abiding here and now. Now usually when the Buddha asks Sariputta a question, Sariputta almost invariably answers correctly. But this is one of the few cases where the Buddha will criticize Sariputta's reply. So the Buddha says, stop, Sariputta, stop. You should never again entertain such a thought. Okay, and now the Buddha turns to Moggallana and says, and what did you think? And Moggallana says, I thought that when you dismissed the Sangha, you wanted to abide inactive, devoted to a pleasant abiding. And in this case, Venerable Sariputta and I myself shall look after the Sangha of bhikkhus. And now the Buddha approves of Moggallana's reply. He says, good Moggallana. And then he says, either I shall look after the Sangha of bhikkhus, or Sariputta and Moggallana shall do so. So Sariputta and Moggallana were the two chief disciples, right? And so if the Buddha decides that he's going to withdraw and go into seclusion, then the responsibility for looking after the rest of the monks falls on Sariputta and Moggallana. Because if they just, follow the Buddha's example and they go off into seclusion, especially with these young monks, they're just leaving these young monks to themselves. And you know what happens when you leave young monks to themselves? I experienced this in my first year as a monk in Sri Lanka. In the temple where I was staying, there was the main temple building, and there were about 12 novices, 12 samaneras there, 12 to 15, between the ages of 8 and maybe 16. And my teacher at that time, this is the first year of my ordination, he was 77 years old. And he was the only senior monk in the temple. And then they built for him a kuti on the hill. The kuti is like a cottage, a small cottage on the hillside, about 200 meters away from the temple building. And I had the kuti down the hill, also about 200 meters away from the temple building. And all of these young monks were being left in the temple without any adult supervision. Sometimes I would come to the temple in the evening or late afternoon to get my bottle of tea, and I see the novices running around the building, playing games, chasing one another, shouting, screaming. And nobody to guide them, nobody to instruct them. So I realized the importance of having somebody to look after the young monks. Okay, so now, after the Buddha approves of Moggallana's statement, now he's going to give them, these newly ordained monks, the discourse, that was the main part of the discourse. It's a little bit of a puzzle. I looked at the Chinese counterparts to the sutta in the Agamas, and the counterparts have pretty much everything up to this point, but they don't have a passage that corresponds to these similes about going down to the water. And also this passage on the similes of going down to the water is found also in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Book of Fours, and that sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya doesn't have a parallel in the Chinese Agamas. I don't know why, but sometimes the arrangements are different. Okay, so anyway, the Buddha now begins by speaking the simile. He says that there are these 4 kinds of fears, or maybe it's better to say 4 kinds of dangers to be expected by those who go down to the water. Okay, what are the 4? They are fear of waves, fear of crocodiles, fear of whirlpools, and fear of sharks. So these are the 4 kinds of fears, or 4 kinds, I think dangers works better. 4 kinds of dangers to be expected by those who go down to the water. There's a Pali word here. Bhaya, which actually has 2 nuances, 2 shades of meaning. On the one hand, it can mean an objective danger. And on the other hand, it means the subjective response to a danger, which is fear. So I think in this case, danger seems to work better than fear. Okay, so then the Buddha says, so too, there are 4 dangers dangers to be expected by certain persons who have gone forth from the home life into homelessness in this teaching and discipline. What are the four? The fear or danger of waves, danger of crocodiles, danger of whirlpools, and danger of sharks. Okay, so this will be a kind of a teaching which is considered appropriate for people who are fairly young, who have just recently gone forth. So the Buddha is going to give them a teaching which will help them to protect themselves from these four kinds of dangers, so that they'll remain firm and steady in their commitment to the monastic life. Okay, so he says the danger of waves. What is the danger of waves? Okay, here some young man goes forth out of faith from the home life into homelessness, thinking, I am a victim of birth, aging and death, a victim of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. I'm a victim of suffering, a prey to suffering. Surely an ending of this whole mass of suffering can be known. But maybe surely it's possible to put an end to this whole mass of suffering. Okay, then after he's gone forth, his fellow monks, those who are senior to him, who have already gone forth for some time, advise and instruct him thus: you should move away and back in such and such a way. You should look ahead and look away in such and such a way. You should bend and extend the limbs in such a way, and you should wear your robe, your bowl, and the other robe in such and such a way. So basically they are these monks who are senior to him in years of ordination. They're giving him instructions in what is called proper deportment. That is, it's said that the monk has to deport himself in particular ways, in ways that are intended to inspire trust and confidence in the householders, in people living in society. Like, in the Buddha's time, there were many different types of ascetics. Some of them wear, necklaces of skulls. Some of them have the hair really long, matted locks, with the hair wound up on their head in coils. Some of them go around naked or with just a loincloth, and others carry these spears. You still see them in India today. But the Buddha wanted his disciples to conduct themselves in a way that would be pleasing to ordinary people and that would inspire trust and confidence. And so when walking, one is supposed to walk slowly, not excessively slowly, but at a moderate pace, to be walking mindfully. One should not be swinging the arms when is walking, not skipping and not running, not shaking the head, not seeming that one is anxious or in a hurry, but or calm, steadily, being mindful, ideally, of each step. And then also when you look ahead, you look to the sides, you should do it mindfully and with a purpose. Don't just go sort of looking, what's interesting to see? Anything interesting there? What's interesting here? Wow, look at that, look at this. But the ideal way is to look ahead just maybe about 3 to 5 yards. And if there's a reason to look up or to look to the side, of course, do so, but to do so mindfully. And then there are ways of wearing the robes, carrying the bowls, so it all should suggest calmness, self-possession, self-mindfulness. Okay, but apparently now this clansman who's gone forth is somebody who's not a youngster in age. So he thinks, excuse me. Formerly, when I was living the household life, I advised and instructed others. I might have been like the head of the household or an elder in the household. I would give the instruction to my nephews, if I had sons, to my sons, to the servants, to the workers, do this, do that. Now here are these younger monks who are so young that they might be my own sons, or even grandsons, so he must be quite an old monk. And they think that they can instruct somebody like me. And so then he gets angry and upset, and he gives up the training, gives up the monastic life, and returns to the household life. So this is called one who has forsaken the training and returned to the lower life because he was frightened by the fear of waves. This is sort of bringing out the point of the simile. And now fear of waves is a designation for anger and irritation. What is the similarity between waves and anger and irritation?
We go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Anything else?
They get more irritating as they go back and forth.
Yeah. It creates like a commotion. But going back to it, like when I was a newly ordained monk, when I was a samanera in the temple, it's part of the monastic etiquette that more recently ordained monks have to bow down to monks who have been ordained longer than they have. So here I am, I come from the US to Sri Lanka. I had PhD in philosophy, I'm over 28 years old. And there are these boys, 12 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old. But when we have the monastic gathering, I have to bow down to them. But then in May, this was 6 months later, then I got the higher ordination. You have to be 20 to get higher ordination. So when you get the higher ordination, then you're above the novices, so then the novices had to bow down to me. Okay, so this is the fear of waves, which is anger and irritation. Okay, now comes the next danger. This is called the danger of crocodiles. Okay, some clansman has gone forth, had a faith into the homeless life, thinking to make an end of suffering. Okay, then after he's gone forth, then his elders in the order advise and instruct him thus: this can be consumed by you. You see, in Pali there are different, so it creates a difficulty for translation. There are two different words actually 3 words for eating things. One is in the verb form kadati. This is probably where your singular kanawa comes from. Kadati. The other is bunchati. The other is sayati. So the translator has to find 3 ways to put them into English. So we have, one is consumed, this kadati. The other is eaten, that's bunchati. And then what's tasted is sayati. And then the fourth is different, that is what is what you can drink. And so they're instructing him, you can eat this, you can consume this, you can taste this, you can drink this, but you can't consume this, can't eat this, can't taste this, can't drink this. So basically what they're teaching him, okay, you can consume what is allowable, you can eat what is allowable, and so on. Then what's probably the most important major obstacle for somebody newly ordained, you can consume food, eat food at the proper time, but you can't consume outside the proper time, and so on with eating and tasting. You can drink within the proper time, you cannot drink outside the proper time. So basically what they're teaching is the regulations concerning meals. So actually within the monastic order, according to the rules of the Vinaya, within the proper time there's really very few things that one cannot eat. And the things that one can't eat according to the rules are things that we wouldn't normally eat. Like meat from dogs, from lions, tigers, hyenas, and so on. But even the meat from other animals that are normally eaten are not prohibited in early Buddhism. Later within, especially Far Eastern Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Vietnamese, Korean Buddhism, it became obligatory for the monastics to be vegetarians. But I don't even think it's prescribed for lay people to be vegetarian, though it's recommended if they wish to. And so the problem really is not so much that there are things that are prohibited, but especially what one has to do is accept whatever is offered. Even if you don't like something, you can put it aside, but one is encouraged to accept what's ever offered. And then there'll be days when the monks have to go on alms round. You just go from house to house, and whatever people give you, you accept, and you eat it. Of course, if you really are allergic to something or don't like it, you can put it aside. But it's always polite to accept what's ever given so that people will have the chance to gain the merits from making offerings. But what's most important is the rule about not eating after midday. And so the younger monks who are more senior, but the monks who are more senior in ordination will be telling them, now you can't eat after midday. Certain drinks are allowable, certain others are not allowable. But the solid food, the substantial food, off limits after the middle of the day. And so now this person being instructed by these other monks starts to think. Formerly, when we were in the home life, we ate what we want, we consumed what we want, we drank what we want, whenever we wanted to. There was no distinction what's allowable, what's not allowable, no distinction about proper time or outside the proper time. Whenever I got hungry, just went to the refrigerator. Not an ancient India. Whenever I got hungry, I went to the cupboard, took out what I wanted, prepared a meal, and took a snack and ate it. And now here it is, 5 p.m., I'm starting to sniff what's cooking. Nothing. 6 o'clock, comes a knock on the door. They're bringing me a meal. He's just holding a flask of tea or hot water or a drink. And he drinks, and he's mumbling, boy, I'm starving. Oh, I'm hungry, so hungry. Sits down. Let me try to overcome it by meditation. Sits down to meditate. In breath, out breath, in breath, pizza, pizza, pizza. Out breath, oh, a nice cup of soup. In breath, oh, the villages down below. I could smell that curry. I could smell the fumes of the curry coming up. I wish I had some. Out breath. I would like a nice bowl of ice cream with some nuts, some chocolate syrup. Right? Okay, so now he's really, tempted. He's thinking, let me just sneak into the kitchen. When the other monks are, in their rooms, he sneaks into the kitchen, opens up the cupboard, peeks in. There's maybe some biscuits, some bread and peanut butter and jelly. And he just starts to reach up. And the door opens and, the disciplinarian and the lot comes walking out, comes up to him and says, "Were you interested in something?" "Oh, I just wanted to make sure that the cupboard was clean." And so then he says, "Well, get back to your room. You don't have to worry about that." Okay, so now, after this is going on for several weeks, he starts to think, now when faithful householders give us good food of various kinds during the day and outside the proper time, it seems that these monks, these senior monks, are putting a muzzle on my mouth. And so therefore of course there's probably anger going on here too. But the main reason is that he forsakes the training, he reverts to the lower life, worldly life. So he is called one who has given up the training and returned to the lower life because he was frightened by the danger of crocodiles. Then the danger of crocodiles is a designation for gluttony. Why is gluttony compared to crocodiles? Yeah, that's a good idea.
Also, if you look at crocodiles, it seems when they're not eating that they're meditating. Very still. They sit with their mouths slightly open.
Oh, that's a good point. I never thought of that.
And then when they get their food, they store it.
Oh, do they?
They take it. They don't like to eat food that's fresh. They capture it. They put it under a rock.
Oh, really? This I never knew.
Then they go and snack on it anytime they feel like it. And the rest of the time they're very still, meditating, seemingly. Probably meditating on the next catch.
Not on the breath, not on the rise and fall of bodily sensations.
Maybe that too, but they're thinking about the next catch.
No. Actually, but if any of you are thinking to become monastics, I could assure you that generally we get fed pretty well, so you don't have to worry that you're going to really be hungry and overcome by hunger or by craving for food. And even the rule about not eating after midday, after a while the body just gets used to it. And the lunch meal is generally, it's a substantial meal, like the substantial meal of the day, equivalent to the typical American supper. So once you eat that, after a little while the body readjusts its metabolism so one doesn't get hungry at night. Okay, now comes the third danger. This is the danger of whirlpools. Okay, so this is described a little differently. Okay, first, the clansman has gone forth from the home life into homelessness. Okay, then after he has gone forth, in the morning he dresses, he takes his bowl and outer robe, and he goes into the village or the town on alms round. So in Asia, this is the standard practice for the monks to go into the village on the alms round in order to collect the food for the day's meal. But this monk is described as one whose body is unguarded. That is, he doesn't have mindfulness of the body, so he's just, walking in a random way, a very natural way. His speech is unguarded. He might be walking with other monks, just chatting, chit-chatting. He doesn't have mindfulness, and his mindfulness is not established. So his mind is not protected, and his sense faculties are not restrained. They're just roaming here and there. And so as he is walking about, he sees a householder or a householder's son, furnished and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, enjoying himself with them. So today, if he's traveling around today, he might see this householder with, maybe he sees a nice shiny car in front of the house, and hears, I was going to say a stereo playing, but it's 30 years too late for that.
iPod or iPad.
Yeah, well, monks have iPads and iPod. Too many have iPads. Okay, sees him maybe with a nice wife, children, nice house, nice decorations in the house, motorcycle in front of the house, if it's the householder's son. Maybe the householder's son has his girlfriend around. So he starts, seeing these things and getting exposed to them over and over, and then as he goes back and sits down to meditate, memory images start coming back and thinking, wow, I have a college degree, I could have gotten maybe a master's degree, doctor's degree, I could have gotten a nice job, I gave up a nice girlfriend, I could have married her, I could have had a nice house, could have had my own car. Could have had nice children. And then he thinks, why not? And then gives up the training and goes back to the household life. So this is called one who has forsaken the training and reverted to the lower life or the household life because he was frightened by the danger of whirlpools, or even you could say caught by the danger of whirlpools. And now the danger of whirlpools is a designation for the 5 chords or 5 objects of sensual pleasure. Why are the 5 objects of sensual pleasure like whirlpools?
They suck you up in the vortex.
Exactly, yeah. And just to elaborate on that just a little bit, sometimes you don't see the whirlpool. It just looks like the smooth surface of the water, and so you might go swimming close to it, and then suddenly the force of the whirlpool pulls you down, and then you're sucked down into the bottom of the sea or the ocean. And so it's like this, being exposed to the sensual pleasures. They might just seem innocent and harmless, but they register on the mind, especially for a young monk who gets exposed to them constantly without, of course, you naturally see things, but if the mindfulness is not established, if the senses are not restrained, then one fastens upon them and starts dwelling upon them, and then they will pull you down. Okay, now we come to the 4th danger, and I'm going to offer a little bit of an apology for this. I don't like to explain this section, but it's part of the Sutta, so I have to do so. And then I'll give my own account of it. Okay, the next and the 4th of the 4 dangers is called the danger of sharks. Actually, the commentary glosses this as chanda macha, which means fierce fish, literally. I think sharks is an interpretive rendering. Okay, again, it's the case of the clansman who's gone forth to make an end of suffering. Again, he, in the morning, he dresses, takes his bowl and robe, goes into the village or town for alms, with his body unguarded, his speech unguarded, mindfulness unestablished, with sense faculties unrestrained. he sees a woman there, lightly clothed and lightly dressed. Sometimes, this is something I've experienced myself. If you go in fairly early morning on alms round, the women, they like to offer the alms to the monks, but if it's fairly early, they'll come out in something like a nightgown. It's a long nightgown in Sri Lanka, but still they're wearing something that looks like a nightgown. But maybe in India, even the nightgown is a little bit coming off. So it's described as lightly attired, lightly dressed. Okay, so when he sees such a woman, then lust infects his mind. Lust arises. Okay, and then, of course, usually not something that happens right away, but if this happens repeatedly over a long period, then the sensual impressions of the woman, sensually enticing woman, start to set up some kind of commotion in the mind. And so over time he starts to think about this more and more. The images come back to him, maybe the voice of the woman addressing him. And then he thinks, I should also enjoy the pleasures of, a sexual relationship. And so he forsakes the training and reverts to the household life, the lower life. So this is called one who has forsaken the training and reverted to the lower life because he was frightened by the danger of sharks or fierce fish. I would like to end it by saying, now, danger of sharks is a designation for sensual lust. But, you just have to be true to the text that it says, the danger of sharks is a designation for women. And I have to say, I don't consider women to be like sharks, a danger of sharks. And I would say if it comes to the relations between the sexes, the point I would bring up is when there are cases of rape, a member of one sex raping another, 99.9 cases of rapes are due to who? Raping who? A woman raping a man. It's the man raping a woman. Probably 99% of sexual abuse within a family is due to what? A male relative abusing a younger female relative. In major cities around the world, the houses of prostitution usually have what? To serve what kind of clientele? Male prostitutes to serve women? No. Female prostitutes to serve men. And of the pornography, probably 99% is pornography intended for what kind of audience? It's a male audience and featuring females. So, okay, my way to interpret this is to say what's really the shock is the lust in the mind, not the woman herself. And maybe because the Buddha is addressing monks who are of course male, so he's designating women in this way. But I want to say, please, all of my beloved women students, don't be offended by this. I don't know whether you could say, actually one could say that men are sharks in relation to women or nuns. But the text is addressed to monks. So. Okay, so then the discourse concludes by, these are 4 kinds of dangers to be expected by those who have gone forth into from the home life into homelessness and nistama and discipline. Okay, that's the end of the discourse. Anybody have any comments or questions? May I ask this women students, how do you feel about a passage like this? I'm just interested to know. Please be frank and honest.
When I read this, it brought to mind something.
And wait, take the Is that the mobile microphone?
When I read this, it brought to mind something that happened. I have 3 sons, so sometimes I get a little angry when everything is geared towards, it's always the poor girl, it's always the predatory, male exerting himself on a female.
Yeah.
And when I went to one of these PTO meetings, in many instances, girls are becoming very aggressive.
Mm, really?
And, I thought, wow, why are we always, assuming it's always the male,
Yeah.
And several years ago, my brother went to a prep school that was founded in 1834, and it had been male forever.
Yeah.
And in the 70s, when the economy was down, a lot of those male prep schools went co-ed in order to get money.
Yeah.
But before it became co-ed, when I would go in with my mother, or my mother would send me into the gym to pick up my brother, that we were picking him up, he would say, I would go in and see all these boys that had come out of the shower with their hair towel dried, all a mess, and their ties were all askew. And that's how it was for years when we would go pick him up. And 20 years later, I actually went to the school when it had gone co-ed. I saw something I never saw before. I brought my son there to see the school, and when I went into the gym, all these boys had their hair combing their hair, things, which I had never seen before. I thought, that's such a shame.
Because it went co-ed?
Yeah, I thought, wow, that whole innocence and not caring about your looks now have changed so much. So I think that sometimes, that's what came to mind when I heard that. Right, anyway.
Back here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this. There's a lot of this sort of stuff all over the suttas. And there's the very famous story of Ananda, essentially, convincing the Buddha to allow women to ordain.
Yeah.
People don't like to do this, but if we're going to take the suttas at pretty much face value, at least where the suttas are consistent, he seemed to have some problems in some ways with women. Now, whether it was that, he just knew that maybe most men were very weak when it concerned women, that's why he didn't want to ordain them, that's an apologist view of that. It's still rather difficult. Look, it really seems that for the most part, when you read the sutras, only the Venerable Ananda didn't have a hang-up that way. He really didn't. Just people were people. Very unusual, I think, for that day and age.
Ananda was almost like the modern thinker.
His personality, really, Kassapa is very curmudgeonly and very closed-minded. They're all different. So it's not an easy thing to deal with. I do know, however, that the Buddhist doesn't seem to have a problem teaching, later. He doesn't turn anybody away from the teaching. He never does that. Well, that's good. But it's sort of a sticky point. I was always very impressed when I described that sutta, because Ananda usually will back off when the Buddha didn't in that sutta. He kept on, well, what do you mean, can't they do this?
He was like
he wouldn't shut up. It was almost like the Buddha was like, fine, okay, you handle it. I'm paraphrasing. And, so I think it's very difficult, and unfortunately, a lot of men impute to women their own weaknesses.
I think that's really
and I think it behooves, I think every woman should think twice before they, dump the blame on themselves. That's just my 2 cents.
Okay, I think Tracy wants.
Well, I agree very much with what Drea was saying, and I think it's very interesting to be a woman and be interested in this course of study, because first of all, I very much appreciate your explanation ascribing it to sensual desire, and also to the facts that very often it's men who really are the aggressors and the predators in the society. But it is interesting because one is constantly up against, as Drea was saying, this is the history of the tradition. And as a scholar, you're confronted with that. These are the facts. So how do we separate that history from the teaching that we wish to follow? And, as a modern woman, I'm convinced that the more women are involved in cultures, the better and more wholesome the culture. We've seen that with the Taliban.
Exactly.
But they find that when women are allowed to be educated and included, things get better. So, I don't know. I guess I can't bring it to one single point, but the question is constantly present for a woman reading these suttas.
I understand that, And it's just like part of the heritage. You think you have to extract the teaching and what's the value of the teaching away from aspects which reflect the Indian culture in the time of the Buddha. Okay, I just want to there are, I think, 2 internet questions, and then we'll have to break for the lunch. Okay, one question. Is there any significance in the fact that this is taking place in the Buddha's home territory? I can't think of any significance offhand. Oh, and then I think this is just a clarification. I guess what I mean by this question is, was the Buddha especially harsh because these were his own clan? I don't get the impression that these are his clan members. The sutta doesn't say that these are monks from Catuma. Maybe the significance, is that it's taken place in the Buddha's home territory, is that it was the Buddha's own family members or clan members that persuaded the Buddha to change his mind. But I would assume if King Pasenadi or the people in Savatthi had come to the Buddha, he also would have changed his mind. So there's actually just one internet question. Okay, so do you have a question? A quick one.
It's not directly in the sutra, but I'm just curious about this one quality of abhaya pradana.
Of what?
Abhaya pradana. Of manifesting the quality of fearlessness in the way of bestowing confidence, so that those who come to you don't feel fear. And if perhaps in discussing these different kinds of objects of fear, that the Buddha is also relating back to, when the monks first came, they had this discursive mind. They hadn't placed themselves in a place of receiving a teaching because they were still, their minds were so busy. When you have this kind of grasping, discursive mind, it's different for those that come to you to feel fearless and have a sense of confidence. So, in terms of cultivating this quality of abhaya pradana, so that because he's talking about proper behavior, proper conduct, not having a wandering mind, conducting yourself in an upright manner. So,
by abhaya pradana, you mean the giving of fearlessness, or security.
The quality of an accomplished practitioner of bestowing that feeling of fearlessness, of confidence, of non-grasping.
I would think normally the Buddha would encourage younger monks to come to him. I think the main point of this is that the Buddha is sort of disciplining them because they were not behaving properly, understanding that eventually they would come back subdued and then they would be more receptive to the teaching. That's my understanding. Okay, we'll have to end now with the sharing of the merits. So we recite the verses to share the merits with the Devas, the Buddhas, the fierce spirits, and with all beings. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumodipa Chiram Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumodipa Chiram Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumodipa Chiram Rakantu Mang Param. Okay, this one we do the shorter way. Etavatacham hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe sadanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Bhavagopadaya vichihetato etantare satakai upapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu vibhutim. Okay, we will have a discussion period after lunch. So those of you who want to join the discussion are welcome to come back. Now, as you know, this is not during the winter. The kitchen doesn't prepare food for the general public. So if some of you didn't bring a lunch packet and you want the lunch, there are boxes of these noodles, the dried noodles with flavoring. So you could get them in the kitchen, I think, for $2 for a box, if you want to stay for the discussion. So we'll meet probably a little after 12, come back here, say 10 after 12. And this will be the last class of the fall-winter semester. But we'll start again probably around March 17th. There'll be an announcement with the schedule after I make it up. If any of you are not on the registration list, you can give your contact information to Kaiti over here. Okay, so we end with 3 vows. Did I miss anything in the announcements?